Podcast.
We in here, baby.
Let's get it.
Let's get it.
Yo.
I always forget about that little let's get it. What's up, y'all?
What up?
We sound like 92.3 The Beat.
I love it too. I love it.
Oh, man. Just
Oh, man.
a little tidbit before we get started. Every morning when I was in high school, I used to call in for the Ruka roll call. I don't know if you guys remember that with the Baker Boys.
I do remember the Ruka roll
Like
call.
a
That's
roll
old school.
call where you had to rap a little song. And I used to, whenever I got through, I used to always win tickets to something. Like I was like 14, 15 in the bathroom with my bride waiting for me outside, trying to be on the radio. Anyways.
And this is when the phone, you didn't have no cell phone. You had to be at home making these calls.
Oh yeah. At home, just redialing. Just
You getting ready for school with the phone just on speaker, trying.
Oh my God.
I got through like maybe 2 or 3 times, and I would win the little tickets or whatever freebie they were giving away.
Love it. That's why I was so damn juiced when Dominique DePrima asked me to be on her show. I was like, yo, wait a minute. Street Justice? Like that used to be the Saturday listen to. It's like such a trip, right? That shit was legendary.
Yep.
Theo, y'all remember Theo?
I remember being young and not like younger than my older brother and not appreciating Dominique DePrima. I used to be like, because it would be like school days and he would be up. You could hear the radio with the little morning show. And I was like, dude, what the fuck? Like, no one wants to be awakened from their sleep with your serious ass radio. And then you get older and you like, oh, this is gems. Like, this is gold. But in elementary or whatever grade and he's in high school, I'm like, turn it off, please.
Wait, this is your older brother, huh? Yeah, he's socially
like
conscious.
4 or 5 years older than me. I'm like,
yeah,
I don't want to hear that this morning.
That's
hilarious.
Yeah.
But man,
grandparents listening to AM radio 570.
Oh man.
All right, what we got today, Tris?
I know I'm like, welcome back to another week. Today everybody's favorite topic seemingly. We're gonna dive into boundaries, but before we get there, we're gonna let Soap go and check us in. What you got for us?
Well, the check-in is around boundaries. I was thinking what I'd like to know from each of y'all is, you got 2 options, okay? You could tell me about the hardest boundary you ever set, or you could tell me about a most recent boundary you set. It doesn't have to be nothing serious, I feel like once you're aware of boundaries, you begin to like notice that each day you kind of have to set new ones. So I'm just real interested in like what's coming up for y'all or a big moment of boundary setting you had.
Ooh, that's a good one.
That is a good one. I think what's coming up for me off the cusp is, it's not a particular incident, but I think the hardest boundaries I've had to set are with myself. And around like I can find myself engaging in like a lot of self-sacrificial, or what my therapist, because we've been rolling with self-sacrificial when she recently let me know. And like, by the way, that's just synonymous for people pleasing. So I think like setting those boundaries with myself probably has been the hardest thing, because obviously it's a lot of discomfort. Like typically, unless I'm pissed about something, which is unhealthy, right? Like it's like either I exist in extremes, like nothing bothers me, or I have to feel very strongly. Otherwise, I'm just like, I don't mind. So get into the place where it's like, I don't, like, it's okay, pretty much setting a boundary with myself. Like, we won't make decisions without checking in with self first, even if it's just to say like, do you really want to do that? Do you really? But like trying to get out of the habit of just automatically being like, yep. Like forever. If I can, and my thought is always like, I can handle it, or it's not that big of a deal, or what would it take? And it's not to be super rigid, but it's just to, again, we don't make decisions without first seeing if we really want to do it. And of course, even when pretty much there's exceptions to it. It's not this rigid thing, but it's new for me and it's uncomfortable, because things that people used to ask and I would just say, yeah, now I'm like pausing and I'm like, I'll get back to you. And that's so uncomfortable to me. Or I'm like, I'm not sure I can do that. Then of course, in my mind, all of the things about what are they thinking? Like, they probably like, is it that serious? All of the shit that, your mind starts to So actively in the process of setting boundaries with myself, so that then I'll be able to set them with other people.
I like that. That's real good. So basically like exercising a first response that's unusual for you. So it's like, instead of yes, it's let me think about it. Okay. I like that. What about you, Robbie Rob?
I'm with Tris all the way. That pause is hard, man. It's like it's always been a fast yes and a slow no, as opposed to like a slow yes and a fast no. And like giving yourself space to like, I have to actually tell myself, I'm not going to respond to this. I'm going to give myself so many minutes to say like, yeah, to check in. Like, is this something I really want to do? Or am I doing this for some other outcome related to this situation? And does it really feel good to me at the end of the day? But yeah, boundaries are tough, especially when you come from that aspect of codependence and people pleasing and all those things. It's hard. It's hard to say no because of the fear that's on the other side, right, of that no. But I definitely have been honoring my own boundaries more, same as Tris, like just like, yeah, I'm not feeling good, I can't do it, or like as opposed to like overextending all the time, you know. So I would say that is definitely in 2023 has been more profound in the work that I'm doing around my own boundaries. So kind of on the same page. Yeah.
And I think the cool thing is it's not even always like deep stuff. It could be something as simple as like, and this is like more trivial, but if my wife's like, oh, can you go grab this from the store? Like, of course I want to do it. But like, even then, like trying to practice, like, do I want to? Like, just get in a habit. Like, so it could be just small things that add up. And you're like, man, I've been doing a lot of things and I feel super busy and I don't have to be.
One example for me would be like, when people text me first thing in the morning, my feeling of the need to respond right away. So that they feel affirmed in some way. I mean, I'm like, nope, I'm not doing it till I'm done with my meditation. So that's going to be, you know, it could be a half an hour to an hour from now. People will live. And
they sure will. And they probably ain't waiting for your text back either, right? We be over there stressing.
Right, exactly. Stressing out for no reason. But yeah, that's like one example of how I'm like, yep, not until I'm done with me first thing in the morning. If
good. And I know
I will call, you'll respond, you'll let me know.
And it's a good setup for your day. I have tried, like I've toggled between, okay, let me try, am I okay texting people before I jump into my meditation flow? In the days where I do, I'm thrown off. So yeah, I've learned like, nope, it's me first, then other people.
That part.
Yeah, I like that. I like that.
Yeah,
so right now I have a recent one because I'm moving, right? And it's tricky because, and this is going to be, I think, great for our conversation too, is I'm holding to my boundaries, but I'm at risk of losing help because I'm holding to my boundaries. So, okay, I need to pack my whole house. It's almost all the way packed. I don't have a lot of people here. I need support and help. I don't like packing in a house by myself. It feels like lonely.
Yeah.
My sister's out of town. Otherwise I'd ask her. So, because, you know, with sisters, there aren't really boundaries. And that's like, we could talk about that too. The places where we don't hold boundaries and, you know, the give and take of that. But yeah. I'm giving away a lot of my stuff. I have nice stuff and I'm trying to coordinate with people to come get it. And in my head though, I'm leaving here next Sunday. So I want the last week in New Orleans to be fun. I don't want to be thinking about packing up my house. So I tell everybody, the deadline is tomorrow. So this coming Sunday, you have to, if you want one of these free items, these nice free items from my house, you have to pick it up by then. Well, I knew that this would happen. People are slacking. And this is why I called the deadline. Because I'm like, if y'all ain't come getting it, I'm setting it outside. And I need to know what I'm going to do. I'm a little rigid sometimes, but that's okay. I accept that about myself. So yesterday, my girlfriend who was supposed to come tomorrow to get the mattress said, I don't think I'm going to be able to do it. I was like, all right, well, you don't get the mattress. It felt bad, but I'm like, I don't have anything to tell you because you're not going to call me Monday when I'm getting my nails done trying to get cute for my return to California. You ain't going to fuck up my week, okay? Yeah. But now I'm like, damn, I got to go over there to pack my house by myself today, I think, as a result, right? If I would have been more lenient or whatever, I could get something. But I'm holding to the idea that I want my last week here to be stress-free, and that's more important than anything for me. So that was a recent boundary I held where I was like, oh, bitch, you really gonna do this, huh? Yep, we're gonna do it. Because I believe in like living by principles. I like to be one way all the time. I'm working on that. I feel like it's integrity with yourself, and I value that. So that's my most recent boundary. So two things I want to make sure we talk about then are like the cost of boundaries, right? The loss that we could incur as a
Mm-hmm.
result. And I'm sure we're going to talk about more, but also just like those spaces where boundaries are a little more fluid, I guess we could say. Because, you know, those relationships exist too. There's certain people who you put it all down for.
Yep.
And whatever else we got to talk about. So thank you, Tris, for the intro.
So
Let's get into it.
So can we like give a definition of like what a boundary is? You know, are we specifically going to focus on like boundaries within? I mean, we're in relationship with everything. So what does that look like? How we define what a boundary is, just for people who are wanting to
I,
clear on it.
and maybe we all take our own like individual approach to it. And I love that question. And I say I love that question because, and we can talk about this more too. I think I have found where the word boundary is now being overused, and sometimes it's not actually a boundary it's people are mistaking boundaries for other things. It's like, oh, that was a boundary. It was like, well, that's not really a boundary. That sounds more like maybe an area you're uncomfortable with or some discomfort. Like, versus like, this is something I'm setting. This is why. I don't know. And I'm probably not explaining it good. So when we get into it, but I've had a few different sessions where folks had even been frustrated for being on the receiving end of a boundary. And they're like, is that what a boundary is? That doesn't make sense. Like it feels like it's conveniently used. Like once, like maybe if we're having conflict, like once you're uncomfortable, you're like, well, these are my boundaries. And it's like, we were just talking, and until you didn't like what I said, now this conversation is beyond your boundaries. Like, so I'm thinking we can also talk about like the misuse. But y'all know me
Like
going
that.
on tangents. I think the only thing I want to add to the definition of boundaries, which was so helpful for me, is like oftentimes we see them as a rule or a limitation or a parameter for someone else. But boundaries are really, or at least what's helpful for me, are they're like the rules and parameters I set for myself. Like it's not like Soko's not allowed to do this. I don't allow XYZ. Like these are like my own limiting. So then I think it requires the ownership that I have to own, that these are things I do and don't allow in my space versus making them about people. If that makes sense. So I think I would just add that to the definition is I think there are rules and parameters you're setting for yourself to protect your peace, not necessarily this person ain't allowed to do this because they are going to do what they want. Like I can't really create a rule for you, if that makes sense. I don't know.
Right.
I don't know.
Yeah. No, I join you in that. The boundary, I don't know a definition. Actually, Rob, I just looked up. I was like, damn, is there a definition for the kind of boundary we're talking about? I didn't find one. That doesn't mean there isn't one. But I'm thinking like a limit to the energy I expend, limiting my energy and where it goes, I guess. If that's there's my half-ass definition off top.
No, I think that's important that we talk about it because I don't think there is a specific definition. I think there's a literal definition of what a boundary is and how do we communicate that with the people, with ourselves and with the people in our lives. I think boundaries are meant to be protective, right? Of our energy, like Soko was saying, and then also what does that look like in relationship with others? You know what I mean? How are we communicating those limitations in like relationship? So yeah, I mean, it's about being clear about what that looks like for you. I mean, that means we gotta know what we want, what we need, all these things, and being able to tell a person that and see if they respond, in a certain way, whether that person needs to be in our lives. Like, and what is a healthy boundary? Kind of like what Tris is saying, like, is the boundary protecting us or is it a prison? Like keeping people out because we're afraid of difficult conversations or afraid of, vulnerability, all these things that we might mistake as a boundary by keeping people out. And it's really something that's a barrier to like healthy connection.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a good point.
I think I too, like, I don't know, it just came to my mind, like, as you both were giving your definitions, I just started thinking of, like, drawing lines. So maybe that's it. It's like when you need to draw a line in the sand, so to speak, like, hey, don't cross this line. Like, this is the line. Please don't step on the other side. And then whatever you decide your consequence is going to be. So I'm curious, so we're kind of talking about what boundaries are, and I'm glad that we are talking about them. Before we dive deeper, I guess, and I kind of jumped into it earlier, but curious what you two think is the risk of misusing, like pretty much like misusing the term boundaries and just like calling everything you don't like a boundary. Like when does it cross over from like, okay, you're actually, like Rob was saying, you're protecting peace versus now you just like setting up walls so that you never have to be uncomfortable at all. Or it's a cop out and we live in a world where everybody knows what they are. So kind of people expect that they got to shut up because it's like, well, that's your boundary. Um, so I guess just curious on what you two think just around that.
I think that our emotions are our guides. And so your emotions are typically the thing that are going to tell you you need a boundary, and that your emotions will be the same thing that tell you like maybe these boundaries have gone too far. Because I'm thinking, when we're irritated, resentful, that's probably an indication that a boundary needs to be set. And then if let's say, quote unquote, overdo, which I think actually I want to normalize that and let everyone know that typically when you change, it's a pendulum swing. So we go from one extreme to another. So if you have, quote unquote, overset your boundaries, welcome to adjusting to change. That's how change operates. Then the good news is you can swing yourself back and find your middle. And so I think like if you are, resentful and you set the boundary and then you overset, quote unquote, then you're feeling lonely, like no one has your back, like you don't have the support you need. Maybe that's an indicator for some reassessment.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe some conversations with people to heal whatever may have disrupted the flow of the relationship.
Yeah, no, that makes sense, and that's helpful. And it's not just putting you on the spot. So Rob too. I guess then I'm curious of like, or I guess where I'm trying to go and through the episode, maybe I'll be able to explain it better. Like examples of like, and of course you can't tell people that is or is not a boundary, but I think like, yeah, it's stuck in my head because I think, and I probably have said it, but I think where I'm going is like just wanting people to understand what it means to set a boundary and the power and the benefits and all that goes into a boundary versus I just know this is a buzzword, so I weaponize it, and anything that gets on my nerves, I'm like, this is a boundary now. And I think even in those initial stages, there's a difference. Like to me, like you said, so a boundary is like, am I resentful? Is like a lot of frustration coming up versus I don't know, my coworker just came and asked me for something, and because I'm in the mood today, I'm like, don't ask me questions. This is my boundary. Like, I think that's where it gets in the way of like the essentially the boy who cried wolf. Like, at some point, it's like, are those like everything's a bound? Like, so I think I'm just trying to highlight that, like the risk of knowing the power of boundaries and keeping that sacred too. Like, these boundaries are to find peace. We kind of diminish it when we just like weaponizing everything that gets on our nerves as a boundary. And it's like, if it's really a boundary, then that would be the rule for tomorrow and the next day. It wouldn't be like 2 hours later, now that you cool again, you're like, oh yeah, I ain't tripping off that. It's like, no, that was a boundary. Like you also don't want to like water down your boundaries too. So I think it's just me encouraging folks to be intentional with your boundary set and always be intentional, but like set your intention, sit with what it is you're trying to achieve and accomplish from said boundary, and then set it. Maybe that's it versus like just from this super reactionary place, which I think to Soak's point, when you're first learning about boundaries, even that's probably part of it. Like you can be reactionary, but I just say try to watch that. Just because I think it's a little hard for the boundaries to guide you if you're all over the place. I don't know.
And I think what you're saying, Tris, or this is my interpretation of what you're saying, it sounds like it might be a vocabulary issue or a misunderstanding for an individual because our emotions are in flux always. And so maybe one day, homeboy from the office asks you for something, it's like, I ain't got it in me today. And maybe next week, your mood is different and you do have it in you. So I think maybe individuals could benefit from, instead of using the word boundary, checking in with your emotions. Yep. And saying like my boundary is that I honor my emotions. And so my boundaries will change. Or maybe being able to express it without using the word boundary. And I don't know, it's like, as I'm talking, I'm like, why do I fucking care about what the other person thinks about the word I use? It feels like the conversation is a bit about us making sure that people listening don't overuse the word boundary. And it's like, I don't know. I guess I'm curious, like, what's the harm in that? Do we not want people to look like they are diminishing our field?
I guess it's me like wanting to I think sometimes we know these things, we're exposed to these things, and then we misuse them or they lose like power. Like so, like you said, like maybe it is like a semantic or vocabulary thing, and I think it's probably less about just like because you called it a boundary. But I'm thinking about a few sessions I've had where people on the receiving end have come back and have been confused, and in listening to them, even me through my trained ear couldn't hear where on the other side it was truly a boundary. It would be like mid argument, the person who's just over it just decides this whole conversation is crossing my boundaries. And it's like, you started this conversation. And then, so I think it's more of that people who know that the word boundary, that's it. Thanks for saying that. So people, I think it's me wanting to say, like, let's make sure we're being intentional with our boundary setting because I think sometimes there are folks who know the power of the word boundary. And I've heard in a few different sessions where it sounds like folks are using the word because they know we live in a society that's become more aware of mental health. So when you hear boundaries, you're like, oh shit, I'm trying to be a healthy person. I respect boundaries. I don't. And it's like more weaponized. It's like, this isn't really about a boundary. Like it's being used because you know that that'll back people off. No one wants to cross boundaries versus, and so I think that's it. So I probably had to
That
talk
makes
through it, but I
sense.
think that's more of it is like, let's just be responsible and let's like actually regulate and make sure that this isn't just like, I'm over this argument. And now, because I think then for other people doing the work and all of the, I think I'm just thinking in general, it can become confusing for people. Cause I've had people like, hey, so we've been talking about boundaries. Maybe I don't get it. This happened. And I'm like, damn, this emotionally immature person over here is fucking up my work because they got you all confused now. You don't know you thought you had boundaries down and now you like, so that's how they work. Like in the middle of something, you could just decide, blah blah blah. So I think like that's more where I was going with that. So thanks for riding the wave. It's like anything, the same people who be like, that ain't healthy, that's toxic, that's blah blah blah. It's like, guys, conflict in and of itself is actually not unhealthy. Conflict in and of itself is not toxic. This thing was not necessarily a boundary. Like you were just over your stimulation level and you could have just said, hey, I need a minute. Like, so I think that's
Mm.
more of the where I was thinking about it. And being mindful again, to me, the boundaries are your own thing. So you can't like get upset and be like, you ain't allowed to blah blah blah.
Yeah.
Was it really a boundary if it's just about this moment and that person? I don't know. So anyway, we can move forward.
Everybody's looking for language to express how they feel, and we attach to words that we feel that'll be helpful to like express these things, right? I think boundaries and all these words that we use in mental health are very complex, right? And they require a lot of like understanding and reassessing and like being clear on ourselves, right? Being able to communicate how we feel and what's going on. And sometimes, yeah, maybe a boundary is a shutdown. It's like, okay, I'm done with this. And in that person's mind using that language. So we have to understand how it's being used, like what it actually means when we hear it. So it's helpful to, if you're in therapy and you're talking about it, your therapist can be like, well, it sounds like that person wanted to shut down that conversation, or they wanted to, that was their way of ending or resolving whatever they felt like was conflict. And that's how they used that word. So when people hear it, they can see that it's a little bit more complex than just, the specific definition, which is why we couldn't find any specifics on like, this is the boundary definition, because it can be used in a lot of ways. It's just about whether we can like understand how a person is communicating and like find meaning or ask clarifying questions to understand, okay, like you want to end this is your boundary, tell me more about what that means, or like,
Mm-hmm.
we want to talk about this further at another time. Do you feel triggered, overwhelmed? Do you feel, help me to better understand why this is why you're deciding that we're cutting it off right here, so that we're having healthy conversations, and maybe difficult conversations in our mind won't be as difficult because people are actively listening and communicating, so we can get to an understanding what's really happening. Because sometimes we don't even know. We're just like, oh, this is too much, I got to stop this right here. But if someone comes back in a more understanding, maybe compassionate way about like what's happening, you can get to the bottom of like, oh, well, this is feeling really uncomfortable for me because of this, I mean,
Yeah.
work and understanding, but, the more we talk about these things, people can approach conversations like, okay, boundary for that person might be this. And how do I want to respond to that? Am I okay with that? Do I want to continue in a relationship where someone shuts down communication? Or, how do I respond to that so that we can get past this piece,
I think, Rob, you have me thinking, and Tris, you too. I think what would be really cool is if we could devise like a scale or a system. I recently took a training for supervision to be a supervisor, and they break down associates, the people we train, in like levels. There's like a level 1, a level 2, a level 3. I would love it if we could create criteria for like, you are a level 1 boundary setter. You are a level 2, right? Because I think, Tris, what you started with talking about, that sounds like a boundary 1 level setter. So, I'm sorry, a boundary 1. Yeah, I said that right.
Yeah.
Boundary level set. Anyway, I don't know. The words are like jumbling right now.
No, it makes sense. A level 1 boundary setter.
Thank you. The order was off. I'm like, whoa, brain, put that together. And then like the way Rob's talking about this, the last example she gave is that sounds like a level 4 where they're able to set the boundary and communicate through it. And then I was thinking, oh shit, well then we need levels for boundary recipients, right? Like how well do you receive a boundary? So I think what we're talking about is like just emotional. I don't like to use the word intelligence because it makes it seem like if you're not there, you're not intelligent, but let's use it because I don't know a better word. I think we're talking about levels of emotional intelligence, right? Recognizing your own emotions. And then if you're able to recognize your own, you're able to respect and understand someone else's. So question for the audience, what level boundary setter are you?
And so for the audience, what level of boundaries recipient are you? Like reflecting on both ends, right? Like how you said, like what level do you think you're at? Like, because I think that's also important, and I love that we talk about both sides, yes, the setting, but also the receiving, because I think, and like you said, I love the idea of a scale because there's some people great at setting and hella offended and awful at receiving. Like, oh my God, how dare you? And then there's some people who can't set, but they receive and honor. And then it's the balance folks who can set and receive. So I think, like you said, it for sure exists across the spectrum. I'm thinking about something you said. So like as we were, and I appreciate y'all helping me dig through that because it was all jumbled and stuck in my head. But I think that spectrum piece like cleaned it up perfectly. You were saying that like usually if there are like, and not high levels, but if you're realizing a person, place, situation, thing, whatever is causing frustration, resentment, etc. Can you tell a little bit more about, and then Rob, you like just curious of what you two feel like pretty much when is it time to set a boundary? How for the folks who are like, I'm new to all this shit, what are indicators that a boundary might be necessary? Or so if you kind of expand on that part about the frustration and resentment piece.
Yeah, I'll say that I'm going to spin it just a little, Tris, because it's like more relevant to my lived experience. I have, for me, because I was a formerly poor boundary setter, I was like level 0. Oh, my girlfriends are coming back home. Because I was just exhausted and depleted as a person, as a human. And I realized like something's out of balance. And so what I then did from that point is I started doing, and I'm very calculated. I'm like mathematical as fuck. I started taking inventory of the relationships I had. And I first broke down like the actual effort I give, the time required for that relationship. And then it was like, I started noticing that there were relationships that I didn't give any time to, but energetically I felt connected to in an unhealthy way. Like my mind was too preoccupied with wondering what they thought of me during the times we weren't talking. So for me, it was like, I guess it was my own recognizing what was running me and realizing that it wasn't me, that I was like feeling like a Muppet to so many people is what got me to be like, okay, something needs to change because I literally haven't seen this person in a year, but I think about what they think about me every fucking day. And that feels dumb as fuck. Like I'm too old for this shit. And so I need to let it go. So when I think about boundaries, I used to just think like it's what I will or won't do, what I will or won't accept. And now I recognize that there's also emotional boundaries, energetic boundaries, like not letting my aura be penetrated by negative sources outside of me. So I guess it was like really kind of like in my own psyche that I did the breakdown of like, wait, like something's off here. the inventory helped guide me, and then began the boundary setting. And I'm still learning. You know, I don't know if I'm ever going to be like super duper. I don't know if I'll be level 4, but I'm still adjusting and setting more and more and finding the little ways that I'm overgiving or overextending.
What about you, Rob?
I was just going to say that, like, even in that process, you know, like Soko was mentioning earlier, is the pendulum swing, right? Where we might like need to really be assertive and really, you know, be harsh and rigid with boundaries, just so that we can get comfortable in that space of having boundaries with people, to then move into some sort of flexibility, right? Because every relationship that we have exists differently. If I'm in a relationship with my family, which I think is an important boundary talk to have for a lot of people, especially people of color, coming from a Black home, likes family over everything, but that's your mama, whatever, and we can't have that we can't have no boundaries with people. But I think that you have, if you're, I would say if your boundaries have been non-existent, which I can relate to, you kind of have to go to that, sometimes have to go to that extreme to like get comfortable with the discomfort of how that might impact people in your life. Also, one thing that I've learned, especially working with clients who have anxiety, who typically tend to be people pleasers, is that people in that space don't recognize healthy boundaries, right? So you might have people in your life that actually have really good boundaries, and you're interpreting it as they are not there for you, they're not helping you, they're not doing these things right, because they won't overextend themselves or they won't expend unnecessary energy that doesn't feel good to them. But for us, if we're overextending and we have no boundaries and those things are blurred, we expect everyone else to also show up in the same way, that this is a reciprocal relationship. I'm burning myself out to help you. You're supposed to burn yourself out to help me. But when you start to set boundaries and you realize how much energy you're expending and you get into that real space of healthy boundaries, you're like, oh, that person is actually doing exactly what they need to do to protect themselves, and they still are there for me within their capacities and their limitations, versus someone else who might be offended by my boundaries and, you know, make me feel bad for them, or I might, you know, lose, which is like what we think about, like, why are people scared of setting boundaries? You know, fear of loss, fear of conflict, you know, all these things that we're like, it's easier to deal with, especially within the context of like the fluidity of boundaries when we're talking about relationships with family, romantic partners, you know, friends, you know, even with work, right? Even with work, like feeling like we have to do these things in order to maintain these bits and pieces of these relationships, when sometimes when we set boundaries, people are actually cool with it and they'll show up, and the people who aren't, then we need to be assessing these relationships anyway. But how do we even know to do so if we don't understand how boundaries are like helping us, harming us, and all these different things? So sometimes we need that pendulum to swing back and forth until we get to some sort of middle ground. If you're a person who's either super rigid or has not had boundaries at all, that sometimes we have to, sometimes if we're too rigid, we're going to have to like be lax and flexible to see what that looks like. And like, oh, okay, some of this feels good, to not be so like afraid of letting people in a certain way, or like, you know what I mean? Or be close to a person, whatever that looks like, and finding our way into that gray area space.
Yeah, absolutely. I think what I was just gonna say, I think what came to mind for me, like as you both were talking, I think another definition I throw out there is rules of engagement is like what came to mind. Like, what are my, because if we think about it, and if we're saying we're in relation with the relationship with everything, essentially like our boundaries are like, how do I engage with, and it could be, how do I engage with money? How do I engage with conflict? How do I engage with Soko? How do I engage with Rob? Like, I think it's your personal rules of engagement that are rooted in things that bring you peace or things that disturb your peace. If I'm feeling unsettled, if this just feels off, if this just isn't my, like, if this just, then maybe it's time for me to, I think what I'm hearing is maybe it's time for me to revisit my rules of engagement and make changes if I need to. And I think it's that reminder we always have choices. Just because our friendship, our marriage, our familyship, like just because our relationship has looked like this for this long, doesn't mean it has to. At some point, if the way it's functioned no longer serves me, I get to change. And that's why I say it's a me thing, because I get to change how I'm going to engage. The other person may never change. And of course, there are consequences to their lack of change, but I get to decide that this shit don't work for me. And I'm going back to the drawing board and I'm editing my rules to shift and try it out. And don't work, you can go back. So I think that's the other piece. And I love that, is that just because you set a boundary, it's not forever. Like, unless you decide it is, you get to decide. And I tell people, it's a process of you constantly checking in. Like, is this boundary uncomfortable just because it is? Is it uncomfortable because it's no longer serving me? Is it uncomfortable because I needed it to be this rigid at first, but now me and you are in a better place? I see like you've made improvements. I can loosen it. So I also tell people, you aren't like locking into, you aren't stuck there. Again, it's you consistently checking in with self and making changes as needed.
Yeah. Oh God, I'm crossing my legs and something's happening over here. This is
Welcome to
aging.
your
My
almost.
God, I just crossed my legs and both legs started twinging.
Join us, won't you?
Almost 40s. I know, shit. Get ready, Tris. What I was gonna say is like boundaries. Okay, look, I'm thinking of an example of someone sets a boundary. The person on the receiving end doesn't really love the boundary, but maybe doesn't know enough about boundaries, and so thinks that because a person set a boundary, they're good at it and I need to respect it and I'll just fall in line with this relationship like this. When in fact, sometimes people setting boundaries lets you know what they have to give, period. And I think that, so like, I'm in New Orleans now, right? And boundaries are different here, and it's much more communal here. And that's to me a beautiful thing and very advantageous. And so I know, like, I'm already preparing for moving back to California and understanding that my boundaries have shifted communally, socially. I like the idea of pulling up on a friend. I like the idea of a friend pulling up on me. And I like the idea of like, if a friend told me on Sunday I'm packing my house, I'd mark my day off and I'd be there for them. And I'd expect the same in return. And I actually like relationships like that. I like knowing that you got me. Maybe it's because I'm a single woman. Like, I like help. I like knowing that if I need something, I'll have it. So boundaries can also tell you that maybe that person operates in a way that doesn't align with the way that you like to operate through the world. So I just want to let people know, because I feel like if you're a level 1 boundary setter and you meet a level 4, you might think that you're doing something wrong because their boundary doesn't sit well with you, but it might just mean that that's not your type of person, right? They don't give like you give.
Interesting.
So something else I just want to throw out there.
This is falling along the lines of what we're talking about, but Tris was kind of talking about this like shifting, and Soka, you're talking about shifting in boundaries depending on like environment, community. When we shift, like if you've either set a boundary and you want to change it, or you didn't have a boundary and now you want to implement one that I can speak to about like clients, and maybe this is like just working with a lot of women, is that the idea of sexual boundaries, and like once you've like allowed someone access to your body, that you feel like you can never reset that boundary of like, this doesn't, I may want to slow this down, I want to take it back, I want to take it back a step, or like, you know, this idea, a lot of women come to me and say like, because I've allowed this person, or I've had sex with this person, I feel like obligated to now continue in that path, even if I feel like it's something that I don't want to do. There's a lot of fear around implementing that boundary. And then some, I find that like will then implement a boundary around all intimacy for fear of it leading to that, right? So like their partner is now feeling rejection because like they can't touch them intimately, or they can't be with them in an intimate space. That doesn't necessarily mean it's going to lead to sex, but there's such a fear around it leading to that there's this rigid boundary around intimacy in general, and struggling to communicate that with the partner because they feel like once they've opened that up. And maybe there's some other examples either for men or in other situations where people are dealing with that struggle with implementing a boundary, taking away a boundary, shifting a boundary, Because like you said, there's emotional boundaries, energetic boundaries, physical boundaries, sexual boundaries, financial boundaries. Like, what is, yeah, like, hey, I lent this person money, and now I feel bad because I don't want to lend them money anymore, and they're close to me, feel some kind of way. Like, how do you guys, have you seen it? How do you approach it? What does that look like, for your clients or for you?
I think I'll just say, because I haven't, like, at least in the work, I haven't had like that same experience. But I think also then, but what I would add to it, because I think I would be remiss not to acknowledge like the difference there, right? Is that, like you just said, like a lot of your clients are female, whereas a lot of mine are male. So I also think that there has to be something in the privilege of it all. We live in this patriarchal society. All of these things that would be a challenge that women experience that men don't necessarily experience. And I think, and not saying that it's an all or nothing, but I think I at least wanted to acknowledge that perhaps that's the male privilege that shows up in my work, is that we don't see some of those same struggles because they already feel entitled and empowered to their bodies. And at some points, maybe they're the ones who are processing the frustration from the set boundaries, right? So
rejection.
So I think like that's probably a shift there. But generally what I always tell people, and then I'll kick it to Sok, is I always just tell people, just because you said yes to whatever, like not necessarily just one yes doesn't mean this is a lifetime yes. Like I always tell people, I feel like lately I've been reminding people, and maybe it's so I can remind myself, like, you have choices. Like you don't, just because you said yes or just because you did this thing, don't. And if they're offended, if they're upset, if they go down a rabbit hole, maybe you could support them through it, or maybe they can manage their own emotions. But in the process, you shouldn't sacrifice you. So I think I'll leave it there, that a single yes doesn't equal a lifetime yes. Like you can change your mind. But so what about you?
I'm thinking about the sex one. I don't have any clients who've come to me with that, but I think overall, our wish, not just my wish, our wish is that everyone just be emotionally in tune with themselves, be able to articulate their emotions, be able to receive emotion, be able to receive the communication of someone else's emotions and not take it personally. Like when that work has been done, I feel like everything else is easy. But if that's not done, then yeah, you're going to hit some snags. So I say, like, everybody do your work, and also be mindful of who you partner in this lifetime with, friends, family, lovers, whatever. Because, young Pueblo is someone I always lean on when I talk about relationships. I just think that he is such a megaphone for what healthy, conscious relationships are now. It's a space to heal. It's a space to fuck up. It's a space to fuck up and to be forgiven too. And to practice understanding and to practice unconditional love. And I feel like if you go into a relationship, any type of relationship, with that kind of mindset, the things that come up in the relationship, you will know, may serve you, but may not always be about you. So I think that, like, if we were talking about two very emotionally involved individuals, and one said, like, we did have sex and blah, 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 and now I want to pull back a little bit, do some reassessing, whatever, that would probably go over well and wouldn't result in like an unstable foundation, or someone's insecurity being provoked. So that's what I'll say, that emotional intelligence and the work to get there is really the thing that will help all of us in all of these relationships.
Yeah. And I'm always granting permission to change your mind. That's your power. Your power is in your choice, not in your ability to control a situation, or fearing the loss that might come with setting those types of boundaries. I think that's the big thing that comes up, is this fear of, like, if I say this or take this thing away, that this person will then leave, or look at me as unstable in some way, that I'm going back and forth in some way. It's like, so yeah, these different things come up.
I know. I see. Oh man, y'all, I'm over here feeling like boundaries may have to just be a little serious for a minute, because I'm thinking of all the heavy hitters, right? Like I think we're like scratching the foundational surface of it, but I think a huge one is what does boundaries look like? As you're talking about romantic relationship, it's making me think of, like, boundaries with family, which is huge, and we kind of touched on it, but I think that's its own deep dive. Boundaries with this is its own deep dive. But and I just am thinking like giving it all the time. So y'all let us know. We might come back to y'all with like more and more boundary talk. But so I was gonna say, and you tell me if this is its own boundary talk that comes after. But like anything we want to throw out there about the consequences of setting boundaries, or feel like we be rushing it.
I think we might be rushing it, and I just feel like we probably 1 or 2 episodes we have to go more of. I think that it'd be really great for us to provide like some kind of guides, support along the way. I've set a really hard boundary a year and a half ago with my maternal grandmother, and it felt like my world fell apart from that moment. So just like, I think preparing people for what comes and emboldening them to, honor their emotions anyway. I think that would be fun to keep going. And like Rob said, it's energetic, it's emotional, it's physical, it's sexual. There's so many segments.
Say this,
I think that we could talk about.
We spend a lot of time talking about preparing people because it does come with some pain and discomfort and hurt. And also there's a lot of beauty in boundaries. It makes you more compassionate for others and like what they're dealing with and what they're going through when you set your own boundaries, right? Because you're like, oh, okay, I needed this because this was burning me the hell out. Maybe somebody else in my life is burnt out. Let me listen to what they have to say, because this may not have anything to do with me. It has everything to do with what they're experiencing, and how do I give them grace without violating my own boundaries.
Oh, so I feel like it's done then. We have decided that we'll continue it. And now as I was hearing you both too, I feel like it's like the responsible thing to do. Like I think we've kind of like worked through what boundaries are and come some snippets of how they show up. And I think that's it. Maybe leading back to what I was saying in the beginning, maybe it's that piece, which is a me thing. Maybe it's me feeling like some folks doing the boundary setting just got a snippet. All they know is something don't feel good, set the boundary. And like you said, so it's levels, because as we continue to do the work, then we become more familiar with like, okay, what does it look like to healthily set a boundary? What does it look like to reframe? What do boundaries look like in all these? So that makes sense too, is like, I definitely feel like, we owe it to y'all to kind of like Sok said, guide you through a little bit more and not be like, cool, talked about boundaries. We'll catch y'all next time.
I'm going to tell you one thing, boundaries ain't going to set themselves. so, on that note.
Okay.
I know, right? I initially what's coming to mind, and it's just so I don't forget, and hopefully I'm saying her name right, but Nedra Tawwab has done a lot of good work around boundaries too. So if folks are just looking for a good page to follow, it's like great content there. There are books. I know her one book, Set Boundaries, Find Peace. Like a lot of folks have loved that. I think there's a second book, but just for folks who are interested in continuing this, like in the in-between, like we said, we'll continue to be here. But if you also want to be reading and just doing a boundary dive, I know that's a good starting place. I don't know what you all think, if you have anything else, or if we leave it there.
That's great resource.
All right, y'all. Well, as always, hit us on IG. We're always open to whatever the folks got to say. If you have questions, hit us. If there are things you want us to talk about, if anything came up in this episode and you're like, oh shoot, well, now that I hear about boundaries, what might it look like with so-and-so? Send it our way, even if we could be addressing it in an episode, or hopefully some of our content will pick up on it. But we want to hear from y'all. We just glad to be back. So yeah.
At Heal and Chill AF. At your favorite therapist. If you're looking for a therapist that you want to help you with boundaries, we out here.
Absolutely.
All the handles.
SoCoRaid.com.
All right, y'all.
And we out.
We love y'all. We'll catch y'all next go around.
Heal and Chill as fuck podcast.
We in here, baby.
Let's get it.